this tank is being put to use in a way that nobody probably ever thought of, but for which it appears to have all the potency it needs.
And Britt, you know, we've heard a lot about joint operations in this particular battle in our war on terror, the battle to topple Saddam Hussein, but this is a joint operation between U.S. troops and Iraqi citizens.
Yes, sure seems to be, David, from everything that we can see and from everything that Chris Jumpelt described. I'd just like to say, by the way, a word to Chris about the reports he's given us over these recent weeks and his courage in staying in Baghdad. And I know he was supposed to leave a couple days ago, and he was able to stay, and we're sure grateful for that. So, Chris, our hat is off to you. Thanks so much for the reporting you've given us from in there and for your courage in staying.
Staying at the Palestine Hotel.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I figure that it was your army that changed my travel plans, and for a very good purpose. So I don't regret for 1 minute that I stayed.
Well, we're very glad you're there, and we're very glad you're safe.
So there's people standing around, hundreds of them now, chanting, singing, and encouraging the soldiers who are climbing up there to the top of their crane arm to hurry up, basically, and get this statue down. There's the clear backup of the people of this city to get rid of this cult around this dictator who's about to fall, at least symbolically, although we know it this time with no yet. Oh, here we go, the American flag. There we go.
I wonder if we can listen to what the sound in that square is.
Sorry, I can only offer the little microphone in my telephone here, but it may give you an impression. So Saddam Hussein is now head under the Star-Spangled Banner. That's all he's going to see from now on.
All right, Britt Hume in Washington, D.C., and Chris Jumpelt in Baghdad. Stand by, if you will. Let's go back to Doha, Qatar, and John Scott is there. John.
Well, Bridget, I just wanted to impart a little bit of my construction knowledge from high school. What they may be hoping to do here is to use the power and that strength of that M88 tank device to perhaps jostle the statue enough, snap the moorings, dislodge the foundation enough that then the horsepower, the people power of the Iraqis themselves is going to be sufficient to bring it down the way they wanted originally when they first threw that line up around the statue. For obvious reasons, I suppose our military would prefer the symbolism of seeing the Iraqis bring that statue down themselves. They just don't have the muscle to do it. So as you saw that guy wailing away at the statue's base with a sledgehammer, he had the right idea. If he can only dislodge the moorings, somehow snap the bolts that are holding it to the concrete foundation, it's going to come over. So if they could use the strength of that tank and the attached crane to get that job done, then it'll be simple work for the Iraqis to do the rest of it themselves. Bridget?
Yeah, and John, interesting, just as you were speaking, the American flag taken off the head of the Saddam Hussein statue.
But look who's holding it now. It's no longer a U.S. soldier. It's an Iraqi citizen waving the U.S. flag. That might do something to dispel criticism, no doubt. We are about to hear from with regard to the Al Jazeera stations, etc. Is Britt Hume still with us?
I am, David.
Britt, what about that? I mean, you can understand these Marines who have put their lives on the line, sweated with blood and guts for the past 3 weeks, wanting to show the stars and stripes in this moment of glory. Understandable, but no doubt Al Jazeera and the others are going to make hay with that.
Well, perhaps, David, one senses that after that flag was put over the head of Saddam Hussein, that somebody, some commanding officer may have said, hey, get that thing down, because U.S. officials have been very sensitive about the idea that this was liberation, not conquest, and the hoisting of the American flag over territory that is captured and taken, so to speak, is not the image they want. They want the image of liberation. As you can see, the flag is being stowed at the moment by that Marine up there as they prepare to give this thing a good yank, if that's what they're going to do.
Chris Jumpelt, are you still with us, Chris?
I'm here. I think that collar he just got is going to do the job, I guess. In the meantime, I may want to tell you that following the signs of tanks that rolled in here. Okay, this Somebody's holding up the Iraqi flag now, standing on the M88, and being cheered. So this is a proud nation. And what you just said about the liberation and not being conquering this, but liberating these people, this is exactly what is happening here. And I believe that looking at this picture, this is how they understand it. There's room for the Iraqi flag and also the American flag right next to it.
Maybe
I just wanted to tell you.
Yeah. I was just going to say, maybe that's a shot that we may not be seeing from Al Jazeera, but along with the U.S. flag, the Iraqi flag being held up. Chris, I heard some applause. Can we just listen for a second to the natural sound there?
Certainly.
All right, we're having a little difficulty. Perhaps you could be our translator there, Chris. What are they saying?
I need to find somebody who can translate this for me. I have to get a little bit closer. Hang on. And I have to get a second opinion on that translation. That's going to take a little while. Yeah, but what I wanted to tell you just a minute ago was that following this sheer endless armored motorcade of American tanks, APCs, and Humvees, and all kinds of other vehicles that go here on one of the broader streets, now have the street behind them is now clogged with cars because a huge number of Iraqi citizens have now simply abandoned their cars in the middle of that street. Everybody's sort of venturing to the square here to become a witness of what's about to happen. And I've seen little scenes just around here. I've seen Iraqi citizens offering cigarettes to the soldiers and lighting them up for them. Fathers with a little son on the shoulder walking up to a GI and then chatting in whatever command he may have had of English. You know, there's smiles all over. So this is a day of friendship, definitely.
And certainly a day of history as well. And Chris, I'm guessing that once this statue goes down, a lot of those Iraqi people are going to be trying to get a piece of that statue, just as so many people tried to get a piece of history and getting a piece of the Berlin Wall back in 1989. Again, just a few moments ago, we had seen the American flag, and now, Chris, it looks like that Iraqi flag is being draped. Let's listen to the sound that you're picking up. It sounds like that cheering is back.
It is. I mean, this is definitely the people have their own flag, but it is also gets the appreciation of the fact that we're just a moment away from this statue of Saddam Hussein to fall here, who is, by the way, I believe, even compared to your average North Korean leader, totally obsessed with his own personality. We've never seen so many statues, posters, mosaics even, and paintings of a state leader as in this city.
Now, Chris, there had been some concern that perhaps some of these statues had been booby-trapped by Saddam Hussein, realizing that if his regime fell, this scene might play itself out. Is there any concern there that such a thing has happened?
Nothing visible, and frankly, I did not notice any of the soldiers who might know a lot more about this than the citizens of Baghdad really clearly checking for any such thing. But this looks like a solid concrete understructure, and then there's this huge graded-in-life statue made of iron on top. So it looks all sealed, basically. I don't think there's room in there to hide anything. I think it's a solid concrete at the bottom. Now the soldiers are now leading people back out of the inner perimeter of this statue here, just to make sure nobody gets hurt. And it's a little bit difficult because many people want to be really close up and get a good shot at this. And this is basically the main reason why we're being delayed here for another minute or so.
Chris, I wonder, Chris, if you can hear me, I wonder what the sequence of events was. It seemed that the Iraqi people initially were trying to bring this down themselves. I wonder if they
did indeed.
They went to the American troops and asked for their help.
It is possible. I did not see that. I was not in the middle of the square at the moment. I just came here when I saw that, in fact, there was this M88 all of a sudden advancing towards the statue. Then I went back here. But I had been, in fact, in the meantime, I had been up back at the Hotel Palestine, where there is a huge photograph, like an illuminated slide case with a picture of Saddam Hussein that people were then banging at and also set on fire in the end. The sad part here may be for those who set fire to this huge thing that only the bottom half burnt, and the dictator is still smiling at everybody from up there.
Britt Hume, it appears that our Marines have done a little bit to defuse that American flag incident by bringing up the Iraqi flag. Perhaps they had planned that all along, but the point being that indeed the Iraqis are playing a big part in this toppling, the figurative toppling after the literal toppling of the Saddam Hussein regime.
In the sense that we have, I think, a series of spontaneous actions here. The use of the American flag and then the use of the Iraqi flag. Obviously, once they put the Iraqi flag up there, I suspect they didn't want the image of it coming down with Saddam.
Right.
So they've now removed what had become Saddam's, at least for the moment, Saddam's scarf. This looks like it's going to be interesting to see whether they pull this down. I guess they will. Whether they can pull it down without hurting anybody or without it tumbling down on the M88. I suspect these Marines know exactly what they're doing. But this is going to be kind of fascinating and not a little suspenseful to watch here as we see them try to do something for which this vehicle
now
with its
the M88
here it
is moving
comes.
backwards.
Here they come.
And the big cheers is beginning to move backwards.
Chris, can you make out what those chants are?
Not from here, sorry. There are praises of Allah in the middle of this chanting, definitely. Yeah, I guess what's happening here is that the crew of the M88 is letting out a little more of the steel rope here on the crane, and at the same time moving the vehicle backwards so that, as you mentioned earlier, definitely the vehicle and its crew are also at a safe distance from the statue before it falls. They're just giving it a little more rope before the final snag, I guess.
That picture from Abu Dhabi TV is quite sharp on this, dramatic. I suppose that gesture of his has now become a kind of a goodbye wave, hasn't it?
And Britt,
there's a sort of see you later, buddy feel to this whole thing, isn't there?
Britt, it might be of interest to note that it is sunset in Baghdad, as indeed it is sunset on this regime.
But once this thing falls, I guess you can call it a day's work. Yeah, the vehicle is still moving backwards very slowly, very carefully. Obviously also the driver wants to make sure that he doesn't roll over somebody's foot who's standing behind the M88, just trying to get a glimpse here.
Chris, does it look to you like those people down by the base of that statue are clear of where it might fall, or are they up too close?
Absolutely, yeah. There's nobody standing there. The U.S. soldiers are making sure there's nobody within that horseshoe there where it's going to drop.
And let's bring in John Scott in Doha, Qatar, who's watching this. John, on Abu Dhabi TV, no?
Well, real quickly, Bridget, Doha, not only the headquarters of Central Command, it's also the headquarters of Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera is carrying these very same pictures, so they are playing all over the Arab and Muslim world. They are seeing the same images we're watching right now on Fox News.
There's tension on the rope now. The engine goes. And he's about to fall.
He's tipping.
Oh, they've broken up at both legs right now. But I guess the own weight of the statue is going to take care of the rest very soon. Here we go. This is unbelievable. So there he's hanging.
It's hard to keep the people away. Chris
People are throwing rocks at him.
Yeah,
and the pieces of metal, wood, whatever, they are shoes. If the people are throwing whatever they can find, they're throwing it at this statue now from underneath.
incredible sight.
Isn't that something? They said Saddam would cling to power, and now the statue is hanging on.
The throwing of the shoes, Chris Yumbelt, you can jump in here. You know more about Arabic culture than I do, but there's a certain symbolism in throwing. There he goes. I hope they're watching this all over the Arab Street. Indeed, our own John Scott said that Al Jazeera is broadcasting these scenes. Jubilant seems too mild a word for what you're seeing here as the citizens of Baghdad are on top of this statue. Go ahead, Britt.
I wonder what Dominique de Villepin and Jacques Chirac are saying if they're watching right now.
Dominic, of course, being the foreign minister of France, and his boss, the president of France, who, of course, opposed the liberation of Iraq at every step along the way. And Britt, we should say, who, of course, now want to get back in.
Well, yes, it does. Well, they want through the UN door, which appears to be only ajar at the moment.
John Scott, watching this from an Arabic country surrounding Iraq. Of course, it's one country that happens to be with the coalition, or at least favorable towards the coalition. John, any sign of what the Arabs on the street might be thinking about this as they watch these scenes, which run completely contrary to what they've been told for these many months?
Difficult to assess that from here on the base, David, where CENTCOM is. We're not getting the flavor of the Arab street that you might want at this moment. And of course, the headlines today were about that Al Jazeera journalist who was killed yesterday in that unfortunate incident. But you have to think that there are going to be some minds changed in the Arab world as a result of these incredible pictures that we're watching now. David?
Britt Hume, you mentioned de Villepin and Chirac and the others, Al Jazeera. Do these people who played such a big role in events these past couple of months, do they now become small footprints or little figures in the history of what we're watching right now?
Well, they're not players at all, really. I mean, they were obstructionists in a sense. David, I must say to you, these images of that statue coming down, of those people dancing jubilantly on top of it, and now the hoisting of the Iraqi flag against the pedestal of that statue, this is extraordinarily effective from the point of view of conveying to the world what the administration said and promised that it was trying to achieve. And I don't think you could, if this had been planned in some way, which manifestly it was not, that we can tell, it could hardly have been more effective and more powerful a message.
Chris Yumbelt, we are looking at people still slapping the statue with anything they can grab hold of, and particularly, and I mentioned this before, their shoes. There is symbolism, is there not, in the Arab world of using your feet or your shoes to degrade, desecrate something?
You do, and It's almost as bad as comparing somebody to a dog, I guess. Yes, this is as low as it gets.
Chris, before
And people
this,
are jumping up and down on this statue and hitting it hard and stamping on it. Yes, indeed.
Chris, again, before this statue came down, had you had the opportunity to talk to Iraqis about what this first taste of freedom has felt like for them? It has to be just unimaginable.
It was something that before it all happened, in very, very careful conversations, we've been able to sort of probe as a subject with some Iraqis we have been working with here over the time. Most of them obviously ministry officials who are now gone from the picture, and others like regular drivers, cab drivers who are assisting us here with getting around town and so forth, translators, interpreters also. It is, for those who are still here, that fact alone, that they can be together with the Western guests, both armed and unarmed, on this day alone is a sign for the fact that they are more than eager to cope with this new situation. But in these conversations we had sporadically with them in the last 2 hours or so, there is still very much a lack of knowledge and understanding about what really is the potential that is in this country now for each individual citizen. It'll be or somebody here will be able to explain it to all of them. I guess a reestablishment of a mass media can make it.
All right, as Chris begins
top of the agenda.
Chris, you're going in and out, but I just want to bring Britt Hume in once again. Britt, does the power of the liberation that we are seeing now trump all doubts about whether this was the right thing to do?
Well, it certainly does for the moment, David. It would seem to me that this is the jubilation. This is the liberators' welcome that U.S. officials and the administration had expected, and obviously had hoped might manifest itself sooner. But there it is, in the most dramatic possible place, and in perhaps the most dramatic possible way. So obviously this has a powerful effect. There's fighting left to be done, and of course there are many long months, if not years ahead, in which the shape of the new Iraq will begin to emerge, and it will be a difficult task to make that conform to the high hopes that the administration and its allies have had for it. But for the moment at least, something extraordinary and historic has happened. It has happened in a dramatic way, in a vivid way, and with images that technology allows to be sent out all across the world. One small footnote to that, David, I might note that the BBC, which has been criticized by some in Britain and some elsewhere as being hostile to the coalition enterprise here, for some reason, for quite a period this morning, had no picture out of this scene, and they were covering an earthquake in India.
Oh my God! Well, while the earthquake here in Baghdad is such an incredible sight, that's hard to believe.
And we know one thing for sure, that these pictures are being broadcast, the ones that we're looking at, in the Arab world as well. Let's hear more about that from John Scott in Doha, in Qatar. John.
Yeah, Bridget, I just wanted to say, you know, I don't speak Arabic, and I can't tell you exactly how the war has been covered here, but just watching Al Jazeera and some of the other Arab feeds that we're able to catch here in Doha, Qatar, it's been clear that their standpoint has been very sort of anti-U.S. They've carried a lot of coverage, a lot of pictures of civilian victims of the war, and the pictures are very powerful and in some cases quite grotesque. Now, the fact that these pictures that we're watching now are also being carried by Al Jazeera, beamed throughout the Middle East, beamed into countries like Jordan, which has been boiling up with anger over what many in that country perceived as sort of U.S. heavy-handedness. The fact that U.S. Marines and U.S. military people, coalition personnel, the British in Basra, that all of those folks are being portrayed as liberators, as helping the Iraqi people to throw off the yoke of Saddam Hussein. Those pictures are going to be, well, I think life-changing, or perception-changing at least, for for an awful lot of people in this part of the world. Back to you.
All right, John. And as we keep an eye on Baghdad, when the camera pulled back a little while ago, Dave, we were able to see some of the cars waiting to get into the heart of the city. No doubt word has trickled at least to other parts of Baghdad. People have to know that this was happening. Maybe people just trying to get in to see the actual toppling of this statue of Saddam Hussein.
The past 5 hours have been perhaps the most extraordinary hours of this campaign, at least from our perspective. Of course, we're not on the ground. The soldiers and the people of Iraq may have other opinions. As we are looking now on the left of your screen at, again, what is probably going to become a footnote to history, very much of one. That is the residence, or it was, it's now blacked out, of Mohammed al-Duri. Let's go back to the live pictures of Baghdad because we can't get that. Mohammed al-Duri, if you don't remember, is the ambassador from Iraq to the United Nations. You saw a lot of him at the UN during the negotiations about whether or not we would do what we have done, whether the liberation of Iraq was necessary. Indeed, of course, he was saying that Iraq had been liberated by Saddam Hussein. Now he is in his residence in New York, wondering, no doubt, where to go. He's certainly not going to go back to Baghdad.
No, and just a hunch here, David, we probably won't be hearing too much today from the infamous Iraqi information minister who's had these unbelievable, literally, statements over the past couple of days. Chris Yumpelt, our man in Baghdad, was saying that he hasn't heard from him, and certainly the reporters in central Baghdad no longer had to bother with the minders following them
Well, news
around.
alert. The information minister of Iraq is probably getting ready to announce that those are not U.S. soldiers in Baghdad.
Right. That's right.
Chris Yumpelt, did anybody in the press corps take those statements from the Ministry of Information seriously? All right. Well, we lost Chris Yumpelt. We can just guess what the answer is. Again, what you are seeing, if you've just tuned in, are the sounds and sights of liberation. The liberation of the heart of the regime of Saddam Hussein. This is a regime of fear. It was based on fear, and apparently that fear is now gone as the people of Baghdad climb on U.S. tanks, on M88s, come and congratulate the soldiers that have come into that town to liberate them, and they are being welcomed as liberators.
And as we continue to watch the pictures on the right of the toppling of the statue, the toppling that was, on the left, we've been looking at pictures of a building on fire in Baghdad. We've been told that this is the Ministry of Finance. And again, over the past couple of days, we've seen such amazing pictures from Baghdad of American troops in the former places of power of the Saddam Hussein regime. But no picture is more powerful than the ones on the right of your screen this morning, with the U.S. troops helping the Iraqis pull down a 20-foot-high statue of President Saddam Hussein. One man actually taking a sledgehammer right to the marble underneath the statue. Scenes, as we've been saying, reminiscent of the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall.
We've been wondering, guessing about how the Arab street, Arabs in the rest of the world who've seen this war through the eyes of Al Jazeera and other Arab news services, would take to these particular sites. Our own Simon Marks has been covering that for this whole campaign, first from Baghdad itself, and then when he had to leave Baghdad, he moved next door to Amman, Jordan, where the Arab Street has been quite hostile to coalition efforts in Iraq. Simon, what do you think the Arab Street is thinking about what they see now?
I think we're in for an interesting evening here in Amman, David, and an interesting day tomorrow. John Scott in Doha was suggesting that the pictures that we've just witnessed could bring about a perception change in this region. I think they will certainly contribute to a perception change in this region, but I think it's going to take more than just pictures of statues toppling and people in Baghdad celebrating, because there is still in this part of the world enormous concern about the way in which these events have come about. We were talking earlier about the similarities between these events and the events back in Eastern Europe in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Those were sort of real examples of people power. Many people in this region will point out that this is not pure people power. It is people power that is being influenced, choreographed, they will argue, by United States forces that have entered Iraqi territory. And many people here, I think, will remain very opposed to the notion of the U.S. government installing some kind of administration in Baghdad without getting enormous amounts of input from the Iraqi people. There are huge questions questions that have been raised at government level here as well as on the Arab Street about precisely what happens the day after these statues fall. David?
Simon, I mean, there is a certain ridiculousness to that point of view, particularly if you look at other liberation efforts in history. I mean, the French were unable to liberate their country without the help of Allied forces. Indeed, most of Russia and the rest of Europe was unable to liberate itself without the help of Allied forces. Do they not understand that when the bad people have the guns, you need some help from the outside?
David, I completely understand the point you're making, but I think on the Arab Street in this part of the world and in other parts of the region, they do not and have not thus far viewed this as a war of liberation. They have, for the most part, viewed it as a war of occupation that they believe is inextricably linked with American support for Israel and with a desire by the United States to establish a dominant position in the Middle East. Now, in order to bring about that perception change that John was talking about, there's no question these pictures help, but there's going to be an enormous amount of public diplomacy required in this part of the world and across this region to try and persuade people here that they've been wrong, that this genuinely is a liberating move by the United States and not what many people here believe, which is an attempt by the United States to enslave the Iraqi people. David?
You just wonder how many of these pictures the Arab Street will need to see before anything will convince them.
It'll be interesting how they interpret them, but they are seeing them nonetheless, as we've been hearing from our own John Scott in Doha in Qatar. John?
Bridget, a couple of thoughts about two men that you've been talking about, wondering about the whereabouts of the Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations and also the Iraqi Minister of Information, Mohammed, I've lost his name for the moment, but you know the guy I'm talking about. He and his group of minders simply didn't show up for work today. As recently as yesterday, they were making those statements that astounded so many people, saying that U.S. forces were not in Baghdad when it was quite clear that we were in the center of the city. He may have actually had to believe those comments himself, or he may have felt that it was suicidal for him to say anything else. And it's one of the questions that's going to be interesting to get the answers to in the weeks and months to come. Exactly how much did Saddam Hussein know about how his military forces, how badly they have been doing in this campaign? Saddam has been known to literally shoot the messenger who brought him bad news in the days now gone by, and people who brought him bad news were summarily executed on the spot. So the fact that the information minister was saying everything's fine, there are no U.S. troops here, they're committing suicide at the gates of our city, that should not be any surprise. It'll be interesting to see if he survives this campaign, what he has to tell to the historians. Back to you.
All right. Once again, a lot of questions about what the rest of the world is seeing. As Brit Hume was reporting, BBC actually was broadcasting during some of this, reports about an earthquake in India when history was being made. But Brit Hume, I was talking to Simon Marks about whether the Arab Street will finally come to accept this as a liberation. There is diplomatic work that has to be done in order to convince them. What needs to be done by the United States from now on?
Well, a couple of things, it seems to me, David. One is, of course, much will depend on how the leaders in some of these countries react and what they will say about these images. This would seem to be an opportune moment for someone like the king there in Jordan to step up and have a word to say. He's got a resistant population, as Simon Marks has pointed out. The newspapers and the other media in that part of the world have absolutely been drenched with pro-Iraqi propaganda, and that, of course, has affected the population's views. That is something that leaders in those countries can do something about. One would sense perhaps that this would be a time for Hosni Mubarak in Egypt to have something to say about all this and what it means, buttressed as he would be by these pictures. Perhaps in Saudi Arabia, even Saudi Arabia, which has been helping us on the one hand and dealing with a population on the other that has been quite hostile to us. Perhaps Saudi Arabia's leaders would like to have something to say at this point. And perhaps even we can dare to hope that some of the state-controlled media, or at least the media that operates within the boundaries set by the state in those countries, would begin to say something about the truth of this mission, which many of those governments know to be the case. So these are all things to hope for. In the meantime, we are continually reminded from Amman and other capitals that, oh no, the only way you'll ever get the Arab street to side with America is by a solution to the Palestinian issue. That is the refrain that always echoes, that is the fount of all the trouble here. You know, it's strange, David. I somehow did not think that those people there in Iraq were dancing on that Saddam statue because they had suddenly today renewed hope for a solution to the Palestinian problem. It just didn't seem to me that that was part of what they're thinking. And of course, all the rest of those countries in the region have an issue here, don't they? Which is that they are not free societies, most of them. They are not true democracies, almost, except for Turkey, really, almost any of them. And if there's an outbreak of freedom and dare I say it, democracy in some of those countries, or in Iraq, some of those countries may begin to feel the foundations of their regimes, if they can be so called, begin to shake. So they do have a dilemma, don't they? And a lot will depend on how they respond.
Indeed. One area of the world that you left out, and when you were saying I dare to hope, I thought you were going to be referring to the French and the German foreign ministries.
Well,
any chance they'll come along?
Well, David, remember this about those places. They have free press, and while they may be biased in one direction or another, they're not like the state-controlled media. I mean, the people in Germany and France are going to read that and are going to see these pictures. I'm sure they're available on French television now. It's about, it's late afternoon in those countries. They'll come home to the dinner hour, and they're going to see these things. And the general satisfaction and joy of the Iraqi people as it spreads, and it seems to be spreading, will be known in those countries, and their politicians, I think, will be affected by that. Whether Jacques Chirac and Dominique de Villepin, having climbed as far out on the limb as they have, will be able to find a way back remains to be seen. They certainly don't seem disposed to be trying. And of course, you have this interesting summit meeting that's going to occur over the weekend in, I guess it's in Moscow, isn't it? Where you're going to have Putin and Chirac and Schroeder all gathering together in some sort of a council of who knows what about what's going to happen to Iraq now. And of course, they'll no doubt come out with a list of communique and statements about how it's all going to be. The problem is they don't have any divisions on the ground, and one will ask the question that was once asked about the Pope. How many divisions do they have? Well, the answer in their case, of course, is none. And the U.S. and Britain, I think, will be the principal policymakers here for a time. They have a separate challenge, of course, to Iraqi-ize, to coin a term, this after-war effort as quickly as they can.
All right, Bert Hume just talking about what the reaction might be in the Arab world. Let's get some more perspective on that from Amman, Jordan, and Simon Marks is there. Simon.
Yeah, Bridget, just picking up on what Britt was saying about the role Arab leaders might play here. You know, King Abdullah here in Jordan has been, in the words of senior government ministers here, walking a tightrope, they believe, between trying to balance their desire to maintain friendly, positive relationships with the United States and trying to respond to that restive population that Britt referred to down on the Arab street. We've spoken in the past 10 days to two senior government ministers here, both of whom are very close to King Abdullah, and they both expressed the same sentiment about this notion of exporting democracy from Iraq to the rest of the region. They said at the end of the day, from their perspectives, this is them reflecting their viewpoint, that the United States can build in Iraq a gleaming modern democracy with a thriving capitalist economy, but they believe that unless the fundamental issue of Middle East peace is resolved, unless the Palestinian conflict is addressed by the United States government front and center, they think that at the end of the day, what's happening in Iraq will, for many people in this region, still be irrelevant.
Well,
look at what's happening
in Iraq is that the Iraqis are actually riding a hobby horse on the head of Saddam Hussein. Of course, that's a figurative head. It's the statue. But as the Iraqis are spreading throughout the capital, throughout Baghdad, cheering not only the U.S. soldiers, but the downing of the symbols of the Republic of Fear, we want to take it right now to Mike Emanuel at the Pentagon. How are they observing all this, Mike?
Well, David, as you might imagine, U.S. military personnel watching the scene play out on live television of the Saddam statue coming down. We've seen a lot of smiles around this building. Obviously, the many people who work in this building have been putting in a lot of long hours during the war and in the time leading up to the war, so this is indeed good news. They've also enjoyed watching the reception that a lot of our forces have gotten in Baghdad. It is important to note that there is still fighting going on inside Baghdad. We can tell you there's been some resistance around the area of Baghdad University. where the U.S. Marines are and also where U.S. Army soldiers are in western Baghdad. There have been pockets of resistance as well, but seeing that shot, General Richard Myers, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, came walking through the Pentagon briefing area as that was playing out on live television and appeared to be all smiles. It is important to note we will hear from Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and also General Myers in about an hour and a half, so we can get their true reaction live on camera. But overall, a lot of smiles here, a lot of people very happy that the plan has gone very well in most regards here. And we can tell you that obviously, though, with a lot of U.S. personnel and also coalition personnel still in a very dangerous area, there's still a very business-like approach here at the Pentagon. The feeling is there's still a lot of work to be done, but overall, a very happy morning here at the Pentagon. And again, we'll hear from Secretary Rumsfeld and General Myers in about an hour and a half.
All right, and certainly live coverage of that, Mike Emanuel, with the preview from the Pentagon. And speaking of a business-like attitude, just to mention this, Ari Fleischer, the White House spokesman, has been commenting through the morning, saying, again, trying to express, I guess, cautious optimism, saying that there are still a lot of dangerous areas of Baghdad. There are still areas in Iraq under the regime's control. The war is not over. Let's go back to Doha in Qatar and join up with John Scott once again. John?
Same kind of feeling here, Bridget. Obviously, euphoria at Central Command. General Tommy Franks has been watching some of these pictures, the pictures of the statue coming down, the statue being dragged through the streets by gleeful Iraqis. Those are the pictures that they had hoped 3 weeks ago they would see. I don't think anybody here expected to see them this quickly, but this military campaign, as everyone knows, has gone very, very well and much quicker than a lot of people might have expected. At the same time, a word of caution, they note that Tikrit has not yet been penetrated to any effective degree by coalition forces. That is Saddam Hussein's hometown. There is a lot of fighting yet to be done. There are a lot of questions yet to be answered. What happened to those missing American POWs, some of whose uniforms may have been found at that military airfield in Baghdad yesterday? There were American uniforms found. There were names on those uniforms. Not clear whether they are the uniforms of the 507th Maintenance Company, those 7 POWs who we know are in Iraqi hands. So obviously a great joy here in Doha, Qatar at Central Command as they see these pictures that are being played out live all over the world, but also the sobering responsibility of knowing that there are battles yet to be fought. There may be casualties that lie ahead, and there is a lot of ground still to be covered to fully liberate the people of Iraq. That's the latest from Doha, Qatar. Back to you in New York.
All right. By the way, as we are looking at Iraqis in Baghdad, there are a lot of Iraqis around the world as well, Iraqis who fled the regime of fear, the Republic of Fear of Saddam Hussein. There are anywhere from 20 to 25 million Iraqis in country. Nobody's sure exactly how many because, frankly, people are afraid to tell, or people were afraid to tell the officials of Saddam's government exactly how many people were in the family. Also, when people died within Baghdad, they were afraid to tell the government officials that family members have died because they wouldn't get as much ration as if their family member were still alive. So it's unclear how many people there are. What is clear is that there are 4 million Iraqis outside of Iraq. The question is how many go back to Iraq now to help in rebuilding the country. Our own Simon Marks is in nearby Amman, Jordan. Simon, there must be a lot of Iraqi expats in Jordan itself. Do you hear of many who are saying they're going to go back after Saddam?
Yeah, there is a significant community here in Amman. We had actually witnessed in the past few weeks many Iraqis heading back, at least 5,000, they said, to join the struggle to repel the American invasion. That's what they said at the time. One wonders if, in fact, that was their true motivation. There are other Iraqis here. Remember, Jordan and Iraq had enormous trade links even before this war began, and after this war is over, Jordan very keen to see those trade links exploited exploited to the full, because the Jordanian economy is very reliant on its economic relationship with Baghdad. So I suspect there will be many business people here, both Iraqi and Jordanian, very keen to get back in there. If I can just pick up, David, briefly on that thought you had about the Republic of Fear. I was thinking a little bit earlier on today, as we saw these pictures developing live, about one young Iraqi government official that we actually worked with in Baghdad a few weeks ago. He was about 25 years old, working for the Ministry of Information in the pay of the government, and quietly over lunch one day he basically opened his heart and said to me, you know, in this country, fear is our food. And watching these pictures today, I'm wondering where he is now and what he's thinking. David?
All right, Simon, we're going to go back to John Scott now.
In Doha, Qatar. And John, understand you have a guest with you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4.
That's right, yeah. Wanted to bring you up to date on just sort of the military perspective on what we're seeing here. These incredible scenes of Saddam Hussein being toppled by the citizens of Baghdad. Group Captain Al Lockwood is the spokesman for British forces here in Doha, Qatar at CENTCOM Forward Headquarters. Just give me your thoughts to the scenes that we have been watching on television today.
Quite amazing and uplifting, John, to actually see the citizens of Baghdad pull down that statue. It must be a symbol to them that Saddam's regime is over, that he can no longer hurt them, that the coalition forces are there to help them with that small act, an act which must give them confidence in their own future.
And it has been pointed out that there are pockets of the city that are not experiencing this kind of jubilation, pockets where there is not a great amount of coalition military presence. And until you really get that presence throughout Baghdad, I suppose those areas are going to be somewhat subdued.
Yes, you're right. I mean, there is no command and control from the center of the ex-regimes out to the military units. They're acting very much as independents at the moment. Small in numbers, I believe a large majority of them have melted away. But at the end of the day, the message will get there. Word of mouth, but they have no television or radio at the moment, but word of mouth will get out. We'll do what we can to bring that message to them. But at the end of the day, we expect that there will be difficult days ahead. It certainly is not the end of the campaign, but today was a significant moment in it.
In Britain, as well as the United States, there have been significant numbers of critics of this military campaign saying now, for whatever reason, now is not the time, or Iraq is not the place. Looking again at these pictures as people of Baghdad gleefully topple the symbols of the regime they've been living under for 2.5 decades. How do you answer those critics right now?
I answer those critics by saying, and having sat uniquely in this position and listened to a large number of critics over the last 3 weeks, this has been a flawlessly executed military campaign. Historians will pore over this for years to come, if not decades. It has been a unique use of force with, I have to say, not a large number of casualties. The speed of the campaign itself and the doubting Thomases have been proven wrong. We've had some brilliant military leadership exhibited here, some extremely capable troops, very, very professional, tremendous capability and a tempered use of firepower, and I have to say that to achieve the aims. It's been unlike anything seen in history before, and it's shown that if we need ever to do it again, that we have the right people to do it.
Your forces in Basra have not only liberated the city, but the city has fallen into maybe not anarchy, but we've seen some of the looting, primarily, it should be emphasized, primarily of government buildings, primarily of facilities that were the symbols of Saddam Hussein. As you look to what's happening in Baghdad now, is there a touch of concern that the exuberance may get out of hand?
Yeah, I believe that there will be. Personal feelings, this is, that there will be tonight jubilation in the streets of various parts of Baghdad, which could lead to similar scenes that we have seen in Basra in previous days. it's a natural letting off of steam by the citizens when they realize that their world has changed forever and they're facing now freedom, choice, and an ability to determine their own future. So you will see, I believe, similar scenes that we saw in Basra. At the same time, I believe that elation will eventually drop down when they come back to the reality that now they can determine their own future, that they then need to take on the responsibility to do that. It's a natural process, and I know our coalition forces will step in to affect law. Under international law, we're obliged to take care of civilians and civilian property in the cities that we have liberated, and we will do. And there'll be a natural process then of engaging the civilians, engaging the administration, and we will see a new Iraq build out of the ashes of the old regime.
Group Captain Al Lockwood, the spokesman for the British forces here at CENTCOM Forward headquarters in Doha, Qatar. A lot of sort of hard-bitten military men just rejoicing at the pictures that we've been seeing over these past 5 or 6 hours. Back to you in New York.
I wish I could see a couple of tears, I'm sure, rolling down some of those hardened cheeks as well. And, of course, we want to keep in mind that while this is a joint force operation, the Marines, the Army, the Air Force, everybody involved, of course, it's international joint operation as well. As you look at scenes from just moments ago where somebody's riding hobby horse on the head of Saddam Hussein through the streets of Baghdad. Simon Marks has been watching this from the Arab Street, as it were, from Amman, Jordan, which is next door, which has been openly hostile to coalition efforts to go into the liberation of Iraq and now of Baghdad itself. And Simon, I just want to ask, is the Arab world prepared to play a part in either the reconstruction of Iraq or perhaps the founding of a new administration in Iraq?
Oh, I think there's no question that the Arab world is prepared to do that and eager to get involved. Indeed, earlier in the day, we were hearing of a possible regional conference that may be held somewhere in this part of the world in the course of the next few days to discuss exactly that. I mean, you know, privately, governments in this region, particularly here in Jordan, but elsewhere as well, have been fairly open about the fact that they are not unhappy to see the back of Saddam Hussein. They have recognized that he has been a major, not just a major repressive force in his own country, but a major obstacle to the development of a reformed Arab world. So they're not...
First, powerful war coverage the Fox way. Weekends on Fox News Channel. Real journalism, fair and balanced.
33 minutes past 4 a.m. on a Friday morning in Baghdad, the holy day in the Muslim world as Operation Iraqi Freedom continues. I'm Shepard Smith with a special edition of Fox News live from New York.
And I'm Britt Hume. One of the issues that has been raised in this whole situation now as it develops with the U.S. and its allies now on the verge of victory in Iraq is, what about the oil? That is an issue that the White House has got to be thinking about. This has been a day when the president was not publicly seen except on tape. Let's get a sense of the White House, the president, and what they're focused on now from our senior White House correspondent, Jim Angle. Jim?
Well, the first thing, Britt, is a new appearance by the President and Prime Minister Tony Blair on Iraqi television. There are no more speeches from Saddam Hussein, no more Iraqi officials claiming to be winning the war. Nope, Iraqis who can still get a television signal are now seeing some new faces.
This is George W. Bush, the President of the United States. At this moment, the regime of Saddam Hussein is being removed from power.
Our enemy is Saddam and his regime, not the Iraqi people. Our forces are friends and liberators of the Iraqi people, not your conquerors.
These television chats are part of coalition programming that replaces what was once official Iraqi television. Several hours of coalition broadcast transmitted from a specially outfitted C-130 as well as from mobile ground units. Both leaders took aim at Saddam Hussein, Blair saying he robbed his own people.
Saddam Hussein and his regime plundered your nation's wealth. While many of you live in poverty, they lived lives of luxury. Saddam became one of the richest men in the world. His money stolen from you, the Iraqi people.
Now, the money from Iraqi oil, he said, will now be yours to build prosperity for your families. But the collapse of Saddam's regime, without a new government to take its place, means the legal authority to sell Iraqi oil and any number of other functions of government are in limbo. But the coalition is working feverishly to rectify that, beginning with a meeting next week in Iraq of dozens of potential leaders.
This meeting is going to be an opportunity for Iraqis from both inside and outside the country to discuss the vision of the Iraqi people for a post-Saddam Iraq.
Now, sources tell Fox, Brett, that both the U.S. and British governments are nominating, parts of those governments are nominating people for that gathering, and that there is still some debate over the final list. But this is an opportunity, Ari Fleischer said, for the Iraqi people working in liberty to work on their own future. Brett?
Jim, another issue that people are beginning to think about now is the major financial asset of that country, the oil. This is an area obviously where the UN has figures in the equation with France, Germany, and others trying to make sure the UN has a major role. What is who owns at the moment? Who controls, legally at least, the Iraqi oil?
Well, the Iraqi government. The question is, who is the Iraqi government? Now, Vice President Cheney said this week that the Iraqis have lost $100 billion over the last 10 years in oil revenues because of the sanctions on Saddam Hussein. And he said they could be back up to about $20 billion a year once the oil industry gets up and running. The problem is, over the short term, Brett, you've got several complications. There is no central government in Iraq, so who has the legal authority to sell oil? Nobody in the private sector is going to go and take delivery of oil if there is not clear title to it and there are no legal complications. Two complications at the UN. One is that Kofi Annan, the Secretary General, has been given the authority to sell Iraqi oil that was already in the pipeline under the Oil for Food program, so that the profits go back to food and medicine and so forth. But he can only do that through May without further authorization. In addition to which, Brett, there are still sanctions on Iraqi oil exports, sanctions that were intended for Saddam Hussein. But to get those lifted, you have to go back to the Security Council, have another resolution. That means working with the French and the Germans and the Russians on this. And of course, the French and the Russians have interests in the Iraqi oil industry. So clearly there will be some complications here. So there are a lot of questions up in the air. The U.S. government has not yet determined how it would create what would be the body that would then claim legal authority to sell Iraq's oil. Clearly, once you get a new government, they would be able to do that, but that could be months. The question is, could an interim Iraqi authority also exercise that kind of power?
And could it not also be argued, Jim, that because the sanctions were on the old government, on the old regime, that they don't apply anymore? And I assume companies would be reluctant to do business under those circumstances, but what about that?
Well, that's one of the things that you need to clarify all these things in order for private companies to go. They will not take delivery of oil if there is any question about its legality. That's why the administration is going to have to go back to the UN at some point to clarify all these legal questions. The UN could, in a sense, anoint some Iraqi authority and say, we now recognize this, in the same way that it recognized Hamid Karzai as the new government in Afghanistan, giving it some sort of legal standing. But until you get that, the situation would be very confused. Brent?
Jim Angle, thanks very much. Well, we'll have more to say about this and get some views from the region about Iraq and what's to be done with its wealth. That's next. Stay tuned.
Protection? Switch to new MSN 8. Sign up now and get virus protection that automatically scans your email, plus 2 months free. It's better with the Butterfly. Call 866-TRY-MSN8 today.
maintain your lifestyle?
We've done the proper planning.
Yes. Oh, and Merrill Lynch financial advisors looking beyond 401ks and IRAs to mortgages, insurance.
Protected growth investments.
These days you have to.
Are you confident with Merrill Lynch?
You bet.
Most definitely.
Introducing Total Merrill. We see your financial life in total.
Tomorrow, SARS and a shaky economy can't keep them grounded. One airline is soaring to success. CEO David Neeleman on why the sky's the limit for JetBlue on Your World with Neil Cavuto.
How is Operation Iraqi Freedom playing across the region? It is of the utmost importance. After all, part of the idea here is to spread the message that, in fact, the United States and the coalition are not there to take over and steal the oil. The idea here is to bring freedom to a repressed people. Let's start in Amman, Jordan, with Fox News correspondent Simon Marks. Hey, Simon.
Hi, Shep. Let me give you a taste of some of the newspaper editorials that were published in this region today, which suggest that the United States still has some work to do to try and change hearts and minds here. First of all, the Daily Star out of Lebanon, and this is not a particularly radical newspaper in this part of the world. It is relatively moderate. It concludes in its editorial published yesterday morning, the Americans should not confuse happiness at the tyrant's fall with a willingness to accept occupation. The only time they will be truly welcome in Iraq, writes the newspaper, will be when they leave. The Jordan Times echoes that sentiment. Excuse me. Get out of Iraq sooner rather than later. Leave Iraq to the Iraqis, writes the editorial writer in the Jordan Times. Now, if you extrapolate those viewpoints to the economic issue of oil, essentially what many people in this region believe is that it's up to the Iraqis to benefit from trade in their country's oil, not the United States. Now, of course, US policymakers have insisted throughout this crisis that at the end of the day, Iraq will indeed benefit from the revenues derived from its oil sales. But what many policymakers in this part of the world say, it isn't even up to the United States to determine the future of Iraq's oil revenues. They argue, Shep, that Iraqis should be involved right from the get-go.
All right, Simon Marks outside our newsroom in Amman, Jordan. So what about the place from which all of these troops came to the south and the east? Kuwait City, of course, and there were a lot of questions there, but some widespread support. Let's go to our national correspondent, Steve Santani, live outside our newsroom there in Kuwait City. Hello, Steve.
Well, Shep, a lot of questions here about what's going to happen next for Iraq's government, and one very shocking case in point today in Najaf. A meeting that was supposed to promote peace and help build a new government for Iraq, or at least to lay the groundwork for a government, ended in violence and death at one of the most holy sites of the Shiite Muslim world. Now, a prominent Shiite Muslim cleric, Abdul Majid al-Khoui, was killed today in Najaf, just a week after returning to his homeland from exile in London. Al-Khoui was a staunch opponent of Saddam Hussein, but he was reaching out to a mullah who was connected to the old regime when an angry crowd attacked and killed both of them. Al-Khoui's murder points up the perils facing anyone who would vie for power in a post-Saddam Iraq, in a country of many fragmented religious and political factions. The killing took place at one of the most revered shrines in the Shiite Muslim world, the Ali Mosque. It's where the son-in-law and cousin of the Prophet Muhammad is buried. There are conflicting reports about today's attack, but shots may have been fired to try and stop the crowd from attacking and killing al-Khoui and the Ba'ath Party mullah. According to one report, the killing took place when members of a faction loyal to another mullah confronted the Saddam loyalist who was meeting with al-Khoui. The killing was condemned today by Prime Minister Tony Blair, who knew al-Khoui, and by Ahmed Chalabi, who has also just recently returned from exile into Iraq in hopes of playing a key role in a transitional government there. Chalabi, the head of the Iraqi National Congress, was greeted by thousands of Shiite Muslims when he addressed a crowd this week in Al-Nasiriyah. But critics are questioning Chalabi's qualifications to lead Iraq. They say he doesn't actually have a true following among very many of the Iraqi people. Chalabi is a multi-millionaire who was once convicted of embezzlement in Jordan after the collapse of a bank that he ran there. He left the country before his case went to trial. And finally, the Speaker of the National Assembly here in Kuwait says that this country, Kuwait, has to be very, very careful before it embraces a new transitional government or a new permanent government in Iraq. Jassim Al-Kharafi says Kuwait should be careful not to repeat the mistakes of the past, pointing out that Kuwait did support Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War, only to have Iraq turn around and invade Kuwait a few years later. Al-Kharafi says we have learned a lesson, and I believe we have to be logical and reasonable this time. So understandably, a very go slow attitude on the part of Kuwait in terms of any future Iraqi government. Live in Kuwait City, I'm Steve Santani. Shep, back to you.
Steve, thanks very much. A live look now inside the city of Baghdad, and much of the story cannot be seen by these cameras. They happen with groups who are wandering around the city trying to flush out any sort of Iraqi resistance. Senior defense officials are now saying they're increasingly concerned about the fate of the 7 known American prisoners of war. That because of the breakdown of the regime and what it means. We'll get details on that from Brett Baer as he reports throughout primetime tonight. We're back in just 1 minute with continuing discussion now on what happens next on the military front. Britt Hume and his panel are coming up next.
Davidson and Licht, we select only the top 1% of faceted diamonds to ensure our customers the brightest diamonds in the marketplace. In addition to being GIA certified, our diamonds carry a proportioning analysis certificate which scientifically guarantees you the brightest diamond.
Oh, honey, it's beautiful.
You think we're taking this customer service thing a little too far? More than just fine jewelry.
You know, life doesn't come with a set of instructions. So what I do is I listen closely to my instincts. I make sure to appreciate everything I've got. And I take each day as it comes. But what I don't do is waste time, cut corners, or live life on the couch. Life doesn't come with a map either. But that's what makes it fun.
Trilogy, a community where dreams take flight.
You want a revolution, well, you know. And there was this one that went.
The Beatles Anthology, featuring rare or previously unseen footage of the Beatles' first recording sessions in 25 years.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night.
The Beatles Anthology 5 DVD box set for 3 easy payments of $26.98 plus $5.95 shipping and handling. Order the Beatles Anthology now and receive a free limited edition poster.
It was magical. 4 guys who really loved each other. It was pretty sensational.
This is the greatest story in rock and roll history. To order the Beatles Anthology 5 DVD box set and receive your free poster, call the number on your screen. 3 easy payments of $26.98 plus $5.95 shipping and handling. Rush delivery available. Call now.
Well, you've heard it again and again. It is the conventional wisdom of the war in Iraq now. That is that there's much work left to be done. But like the conventional wisdom sometimes is, it's true. And I'm joined now again by retired Air Force Lieutenant General Tom McInerney, and at my right here, Marty Strong, the retired Navy SEAL. General McInerney, let me turn to you first. In your estimate, what is left to be done and how long will it take?
Well, we've got to bring down the north, and as I say, Mosul, I believe, will be coming down tonight, our time, daytime there, and then we're going to focus on Tikrit. I believe that'll take at the most 5+ days.
Let me ask you a question about that Tikrit. We keep hearing that they show up, our forces show up in places where there were Iraqi divisions, or right. They expected even detachments of Iraqi divisions. They find boots on the ground, but boots on the ground in a way that people don't usually mean. Empty boots, right. Closed, artillery, whatever, abandoned.
Right, they went home.
Or they don't find anything at all. Now, the question is, I think a lot of people have is it possible that major Iraqi forces could be regrouping around Tikrit to become again an effective fighting force that might really be a threat to our forces? What's your view?
I think it's a very low probability. As I said, there's a brigade of the Adnan division. There are other regular units, but the pounding is going to be so intense, Britt. They do have command and control. The commander of the Northern Command that Saddam put in there, Izzat Ibrahim, is still up there. There's some command and control, but believe you, this thing is going to go down fast when we put the focus on it. Now, there's going to be a lot of cleanup around there. Like there's a lot of cleanup around Baghdad. We've got to go through that labyrinth of underground passageways down there, that old subway that they built, and a whole host of things. We've got to hunt for those POWs. We've got to find out where the money went, where the weapons of mass destruction. And there will be terrorists, Baathists, Fedayeen, that pockets around that will be continuing doing. But the bulk of it will be 5 to 7 days. The major force work will be done by then.
And with that cleanup work to follow, right?
Cleanup work to follow, yes.
So the war, as we would know it, apart from mopping up, is a week, in your judgment?
I believe that. Yeah, about a week.
Now, at this stage, Marty Strong, what are Special Operations Forces most engaged in now? Well, you've talked about the North. We kind of know about that. They're critical up there. They're kind of all we have up there. What about elsewhere?
Well, basically, you get this transition that the General was talking about between a hot war and basically peace, democratization, hopefully. That interim period, that pacification period, can be as long or as short as we make it through our humanitarian efforts and whether the Iraqi people really believe what we're saying and what we're doing to be in their best interest. If that's the case, there's going to be a lot of intelligence information flowing from that population that's going to allow the Special Operations Hunter side to find all the people that we haven't been able to find yet and to seek out weapons of mass destruction and continue on the same kind of agenda. Whereas the helping side of Special Operations, the special forces that you see up near Tikrit and working with the Kurds, they're going to be working with trying to help stabilize the environment so that we can get law and order in the hands of the Iraqis. Now, this takes a while, and in some cases, say in the invasion of Panama, 5 months later, we were still looking for people in the woods and in the jungle that were causing problems, and we're still in Afghanistan right now.
What about, contrast, by the way, the role of Special Operations in Afghanistan and what role they played there with the role they're playing here. You were talking to me earlier about the role that Special Operations, Russian Special Operations played in Afghanistan, and we kind of went to school on that.
Right. Well, one thing, you hear a lot about this is one of the greatest use of special operations in warfare, in the history of warfare. But in reality, the Russians used Spetsnaz when they took over Afghanistan originally. They basically seized power in Kabul that way.
That's the name of their Special Operations Forces?
That's correct. Their Special Operations Forces. They invested a lot of money in that capability. The conventional forces flowed in behind them and basically set up a garrison state. Now, they were invaders. They didn't really care about liberating. And in a very short period of time, that garrison state, those sentries sitting on bridges and guarding buildings, etc., became targets for a population that wanted to throw out the invader. Now, on one hand, we've done the special operations part right. We've done the coalition conventional side correctly. But the critical phase now is to go in there and truly liberate and win the hearts and minds at every level of society, from the top to the bottom.
And Tom McInerney, what does that require in your judgment? We've heard the role of Special Operations. At this point now, the conventional force role is about over. People are starting to go home when we get to this stage, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
But what about, who's going to police the country? How's all that going to get done?
Well, that's where the Iraqi Interim Authority that you saw Chalabi representing, but there'll be more. He's just the first one, Iraqi face. That's where we've got to bring that up, and General Jay Garner is going to be working now.
Now, we're a week away, by your estimate, from the end of it. That's certainly as good an estimate for the major force.
Yes.
Forces are still flowing in, though, in some number.
Correct.
I mean, you got that 4th Infantry Division, which has really not gotten in there yet. Right. We got others flowing in there, a couple of thousand every day. Where are they going? What are they doing?
Well, what they're going to do, I believe the 4th will probably be, and maybe a 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment will be the last forces that they'll bring in. But you actually need more forces to stabilize the country than you did to attack it. And that's because the powerful air forces in that aren't of much use to you to help reach out. So you have a large area to cover. And you want to make sure that the Turks don't come in, or the Iranians don't start infiltrating, or the Syrians don't start creating a lot of problems.
Because you're not only now concerned about securing your own forces and securing, you've got to become the army of that country in a way, don't you?
You have got to put a shield around Iraq to enable the Iraqi people to grow democracy with our help and with the help of the interim Iraqi government, authority as we're calling it. And so that is an incubation period. and that's why we're going to need a fairly large force, not for a long time, Britt. You know, I think 6 to 8 months, much of it will be out by then.
And during all this time, that's, Marty, when these special operations enterprises expand in a way, don't they?
They do expand, and they become a little more subtle. And they, these migrating terrorists that supposedly are coming in, they may be a problem, but they're also going to be a target for special operations.
All right, Marty Strong, Tom McInerney, great to see you both. Thanks for joining us tonight. We got to take a break here for to make a little money, pay a few bills, but Shep and I will be back after that. Please stay tuned.
Tonight, coalition troops are moving north. How much of Iraq's army is still resisting? Could fierce fighting lie ahead? We'll talk to Arizona Senator John McCain and Indiana Senator Evan Bayh, and we'll be joined by the commanding officer of the USS Constellation. We'll talk to former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich as well, and we'll get a live report from Oliver North, who's with the Marines inside Iraq. It's all coming up in just a few minutes on Hannity and Combs.
No place like it. For 100 years, people have been coming home to Andersen Windows.
Hello, my darling sweetheart face.
Long live the home. Andersen Windows.
There comes a time when you must leave it all behind. A perfect shower is a necessity. Forget it all. Soothe. Invigorate. Renew. Finally.
Growy. At the end of the day, there can be no reason for less.
Technology and HB people help BMW Williams run every race before the driver ever gets in the car.
It has now been a day and a half, Shep, since we saw that statue fall in the center of Baghdad. I think we all knew at that moment that that country and that city certainly would not be the same. We saw it replayed again today in Kirkuk. A sense now that we're getting toward the end of this, although, as everybody says, and we've heard it again here tonight, much left to be done.
Sure, and I guess there are a lot of questions about Saddam's hometown and exactly how it will fall, how stiff the resistance will be there. Of course, the Pentagon and the rest of the coalition insisting, not in question now, is how this will all end. It'll end. Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, Shep, that one of the things that's been striking about this is we listened to General McInerney throughout this and to others who are sort of savvy about military affairs. They never had a moment's doubt about what would happen when we engaged those Iraqi divisions and that they would be run through. And Shep, it appears tonight that they have, and those that are left are probably headed for the same fate.
Certainly does. For Britt Hume in Washington, I'm Shepard Smith in New York. Hannity and Combs coming up next. I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, stay brave, stay aware, stay with Fox.
Welcome to Hannity and Combs. I'm Alan Combs. Let's get right to our top story tonight. Coalition forces are turning their attention toward the northern cities of Kirkuk, Mosul, and Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit. And can our troops expect the same success they had in Baghdad? Joining us from Washington, Arizona Senator John McCain. Senator, good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, Alan.
Good to have you on Hannity and Combs. The idea that it was a great day for freedom yesterday, and in many respects a great victory, but we shouldn't sit, you know, and believe that it's over yet, should we? And I think the president's pretty clear not to make that mistake.
Oh, I think so. We saw suicide bombing in Baghdad. We saw
significant conflicts throughout the country, but you also saw Iraqi soldiers in the north trying to find ways to surrender. There's no doubt that it's all crumbling, but of additional concern, Alan, is these Fedayeen, some of them from other countries, that will probably fight to the death, and that's very dangerous. But you know, it still was a marvelous day yesterday, thanks to these wonderful men and women.
Regardless of which side we're on politically, we can certainly say this has been a very successful military campaign. Let me ask you about the POWs, because you, of course, have suffered in that way yourself. You've been a prisoner of war. There's now a story that we have 7 POWs. We have no regime to negotiate with. We're not sure who to talk to about it. We don't have intelligence from the other side. So it's a unique situation, isn't it?
In some respects, yes, but I know that we are making it our top priority wherever our military goes. We are first questioning people on that subject. As you know, we went into a prison in Baghdad where we think they may have been held, but we're also sending a very important message. Those people that are holding them, it better not harm them, or they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of international law, which is according to the Geneva Conventions for the treatment of prisoners of war, and we will track them down.
Are you, as someone who spent years yourself as a POW, are you surprised at the brutality you've heard with which Jessica Lynch was treated and the other POWs?
Well, I'm saddened by it, but obviously these people are not surprising. The 91 experience, as I understand it, that they were badly mistreated at first and a little better later on. We'll pray for them, and they know that we're doing everything in our power to get them back.
Are you confident moving forward that we can, you know, institute some kind of democracy in the middle of the Muslim world? And is there a way to do this? I mean, do you go for a full-fledged democracy? Do you go for movement toward democracy? Where do you draw that line? And how do we know when it's time to get out?
I'm glad you asked that question, Alan. First of all, we want to get out as soon as possible. Our object is to have Iraqis govern Iraqis, not the United Nations. Look, there is a certain elitist attitude about that people in the Middle East don't have the same hopes and dreams and aspirations as people all over the earth, including the United States, that somehow in the Middle East you can't have democracy. I reject that. I reject that with everything I've ever known and believed in. Will it be hard to put in democracy in a country where the people have been so brutally repressed for so long? Absolutely. But I believe it'll happen. I believe it'll send a message throughout the region, and people in Saudi Arabia and Syria and Egypt and all these other countries will start wanting the same thing, and that's a chance to live in a free and open society.
Senator, good to see you again. Sean Hannity here.
Hey, Sean.
Speaking of Syria, I want to ask you specifically, we now have pretty much incontrovertible evidence of them supplying weapons to the Iraqis, and multiple reports now that they, in fact, are receiving some Iraqi officers there. Is there
Syrian officers? Oh, that are escaping, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. What should we do?
Well, first of all, we ought to make it clear that when they allowed or sent Syrian soldiers in to try to kill Americans, that's very serious. That's a very serious situation. I don't think we're ready to act militarily against them, but I think we will hold them accountable in a number of respects. And I think that the Syrian government is the last of the Ba'athist government, which is, you know, closest to fascist. And we'll be trying to help their people get the same kind of freedom from oppression that the Iraqi people just experienced, and we can do that economically, culturally, and in a whole lot of other ways.
Look, we've witnessed history in the beginning now. We're not completely through here, but of 25 million people. Let me ask a roundabout question in regards to remarks that Nancy Pelosi made earlier today. If George McGovern or Jimmy Carter were president instead of Ronald Reagan, is there a strong possibility the Berlin Wall wouldn't have come down? Is there a strong possibility those nuclear warheads would still be pointed at us?
I believe that in the words of Margaret Thatcher, that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot. And I also believe that great credit goes to one old haberdasher from Missouri named Harry Truman, who had the guts to go to Korea and fight there. I think that there's a lot of presidents that deserve enormous credit. I don't agree. I didn't agree when Mr. Carter decided to kiss Mr. Brezhnev, and I didn't agree when Mr. Carter didn't take stringent action to have our hostages returned. I admire and respect his post-presidency conduct. I don't admire and respect or agree with his presidency.
My point is that the left opposed Reagan, be it, you know, his weapons buildup, calling the Soviet Union evil, deploying weapons in Europe, and so on and so forth. And I contend that the likelihood that it would have fallen is probably negligible if these other men were president. In the same context, you know, the scenes that we saw yesterday, this statue coming down, you know, if the Democrats, the United Nations, the French and the Germans had their way, or Nancy Pelosi, who says today, I have absolutely no regret about my vote against this war, the same question remains, the cost in human lives, the cost to our budget, probably $100 billion. And then she said, we could have probably brought down the statue for a lot less. And I'm saying there is a worldview here that I think needs to be examined, because that scene wouldn't have taken place yesterday if a lot of top-ranking Democrats had had their way.
Well, I think the American people will make a decision, and I saw a poll today that you might have seen that 77% of the American people approve of President Bush. That is a direct endorsement of his view of how this should be conducted. And look, I just want to say again, the leadership that the President has shown, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, General Myers, has been magnificent, and I'm so proud of them. But I'm most proud of these young men and women. It's remarkable. Remarkable.
You know what? And you and I had discussed in detail the obstacles and the dangers that they faced, and to watch these guys to go into harm's way for liberation of a people and to prevent weapons of mass destruction from ever reaching our towns and our cities. It is a remarkable story.
Sean, could I just interrupt 1 second? Sure. I will remember the statue coming down, but I'll also never forget the picture of the wounded Iraqi woman on the bridge, 3 young soldiers risking their lives under fire and saving her life. That's what the American soldiers are all about.
Well, I totally agree with you, but I mean, there's a worldview difference here, Senator, and I know I sense you're trying to avoid this discussion, and you can if you want. That's not important to me. But there's my point is that once again I argue that there are people that are now going to be lecturing us on what to do in a post-Saddam Iraq that wouldn't have had us there in the first place, that may put obstacles in the president's way at every turn, now want to jump on board, some of them, and take credit for it. They were wrong in the Cold War. They're wrong here. And I think it's important that we've got to examine these competing visions for the world.
Yeah, and I agree. And I'd like to say the post-Saddam vision of those who want the United Nations to take over Iraq are defying history, are ignoring the lessons of history. The United Nations failed in Cambodia. The United Nations failed in Haiti. The United Nations is still in Kosovo years later. We want Iraq run by Iraqis. Yes, United Nations organizations can do a great job, and I'm all for humanitarian relief efforts, etc. But the Iraqi people are the ones that should be governing Iraq, even if they get off to an uneven start and there's problems and there's difficulties. This nation had some difficulties from time to time, as we might recall. So one of the great debates on the ones that fundamentally oppose this conflict are going to say, now the United Nations has to take over. I soundly reject that. And finally, the Russians and the French and the Germans, as you know, are going to meet in St. Petersburg.
Well, why don't we talk about that in a second? Can we take a break?
Sure.
All right, we'll come back. And
we will continue with the Senator after the break. Also coming up, Indiana Senator Evan Bayh will weigh in, and then we'll get a live update from the commander of the USS Constellation, and later former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich is going to join us, and Colonel Oliver North will bring us a live report from the front lines, and retired Army Colonel David Hunt will tell us what's next for Operation Iraqi Freedom when Hannity and Combs comes back.
Let's say your sister lives in town, but your brother lives on the other side of the country. A phone call to your brother should cost the same as it does to your sister, don't you think? Well, it does now, because with the neighborhood, you get unlimited local and long distance for one low monthly price makes the whole country seem like a little neighborhood.
Call 1-800-JOIN-MCI today, the neighborhood, where local and long distance come together.
It's powerful. It's beautiful.
I can see that.
How did they make it so incredibly smooth? It's technical.
Antonio, tonight you'll drive my car.
Again?
Again.
Introducing the entirely new Lexus RX 330. Putting the world on notice. Again.
Bill, we have a bachelorette party that wants to find a great hotel in Florida, and money's tight. Destination Orbitz.
Well, sir, our new hotel matrix is loaded with options, and I just negotiated another Orbitz Saver for a hotel in Miami. In fact, Hunt and Star are there right now. This Orbitz Saver hotel's amazing, close to the beach, and the view's magnificent.
It certainly is.
Hi, Candy. The bachelorettes will be pleased. Another mission accomplished, Neil.
Going to check in with the troops a little later on. Also coming up from the other side of the aisle, we'll check in with Senator Evan Bayh. He'll join the debate. And then tonight, live from the USS Constellation, the ship's commanding officer, Captain John Miller, will join us. First, we continue with a good friend, Arizona Senator John McCain. Senator, and you have made very forceful, very strong, passionate arguments all the way along on this, and I got to give you credit because I think you're one of the leaders in helping this liberation happen. You wanted to comment about this meeting that was going to take place between the French, the Germans, the Russians, and Kofi Annan this weekend. I am very concerned and will be very angry if they have any role beyond a humanitarian role in a post-Saddam Iraq.
I will too, and if the French and the Russians really want to help Iraq, they can forgive the debt that the Saddam Hussein regime owes them, which Saddam Hussein spent mainly on weapons and palaces. Forgive the debt so that the new government of Iraq can start off with a clean slate. I'm sure that would be widely applauded throughout the world. You think the French are going to do it?
No, I don't think they're going to do it, and I think they're going to insist on some deals that were actually made with the dictator on oil and some other matters be enforced even when there's a new regime in place, and I think they don't have a legal leg to stand on. My concern here, Senator, as we get to the bottom of why it is they took on this position against the United States, I think we're going to find financial dealings and arms dealings that are going to upset a lot of people in this country, including the president and vice president. I
don't think there's any doubt. There's no doubt. Particularly the weapons.
Particularly the weapons. What then do we do at that point? I mean, should we be willing to tell the French that obviously our friendship is strained right now to a large extent, but how far we ought to be willing to go here?
I think to a large degree, once all this comes out, that the French will become isolated even within Europe. And I would like to make a differentiation between the French and the Germans. The Germans helped us in Kosovo, Bosnia, Afghanistan. They're protecting our bases in Germany. This was just a cynical card played by Schroeder in order to get reelected. The fundamental tenets of our relationship with Germany are good. With France, Mr. Chirac has said that he wants to be a counterweight. I don't see how you can be an ally and be a counterweight at the same time. So I think we should be generous in victory and try to be inclusive in everything, in every way we can. But I don't know how you deal with the French. I'll have to leave it to somebody smarter than I am.
Well, I think your idea of forgiving the debt is a great idea, and that's exactly what would be. And if they did that, wouldn't that be a good starting out point for them to participate? And wouldn't it be the more countries the merrier in terms of a coalition after the war to put it together so that it doesn't fall just upon the United States financially and otherwise?
As long as, Alan, they don't try to have a role in the government of the country. If they want to provide humanitarian relief, if they want to have doctors in there and medical care and all those kinds of things, absolutely, we would welcome it. We'd probably welcome it more in the form of a lot of international organizations. But for them to have a role in running that country and the government of that country, I think is unacceptable because of the close relationship that they had with Saddam Hussein.
Don't we have to be very careful? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
don't we have to be very careful to be seen as liberators, not occupiers, and be out of there in a very quick and efficient way?
Absolutely, and that means not a UN government, but a Iraqi civilian government, sort of like we set up in Afghanistan, and do it soon, and let them make their mistakes, and recognize that it's going to be very difficult to build a police. Look, the important thing is, after World War II, we denazified Germany. We've got to de-Baathize Iraq. We cannot allow the old regime people to come in to restore law and order. That would be a terrible betrayal of the Iraqi people.
When you mention Afghanistan, though, I mean, there's still there's word that the Taliban is regrouping. There's word that you got warlords in various parts of the country. Is that really the model that's going to work in Iraq? And indeed, has it been even that? I mean, there's been some success in Afghanistan, no question, but there's still a lack of order there.
Oh, they've got a long way to go. We have made mistakes. I think we should have had a larger peacekeeping force, but nobody in Afghanistan threatens the United States of America. Nobody's running terrorist training camps to orchestrate attacks on the United States of America. And yes, it's extremely difficult, and yes, we've made mistakes, but I have great faith in Karzai, for example. But it's going to be a long, rough road. It's going to be a long, rough road in Iraq as well. But it's going to be, I think, the dawning of a new day in the Middle East, and I am by nature an optimist.
I share that optimism. Senator, good to see you. Appreciate you being with us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for being on board. And after the break, Indiana Senator Evan Bayh, he'll join the debate from the other side. Then we're going to talk with the USS Constellation. We'll go right out there. We'll check in with their commanding officer, Captain John Miller, and he'll join us live from the ship. Also, Ali will check in tonight. That's all straight ahead.
Updates on overnight military maneuvers, plus the latest developments from our nation's capital. Fox and Friends, real journalism, fair and balanced.
Now that is a delicious-looking bowl of pasta.
Please give our compliments to the gentleman at table 42. Grazie. Bravo, signore! Bravo!
Create your own pasta from $7.99. Romano's Macaroni Grill, making life delicious.
How do you invest to help secure your future? You start with your dreams. And Edward Jones.
My life, my world, it all begins with a dream.
Edward Jones.
Are you one of the millions suffering from an illness that persists despite modern medicine? Then return to nature. Juice from the Noa Noa fruit is a relatively unknown treatment in today's society. Used by the Polynesian islanders for centuries, its curative properties is nothing short of a miracle. Relief from arthritis to diabetes to depression. Noni juice even promotes weight loss. Call today. What are you waiting for? Relief is just a call away.
I do almost everything online. So when I refinanced my home, I went to fremontbank.com.
Their application is so easy.
And when I had a question, I just picked up the phone and got the answers I needed and got an excellent no closing cost loan. No points, no hidden fees.
So check out our bank, Fremont Bank.
Apply by phone, online, or in person today with fixed-rate mortgages as low as 5 3/8%. Call us today at 1-800-659-REFI. Fremont Bank. Together we can. Equal housing lender.
Coming up on Hannity and Colmes, her nickname is Connie, and she's played an important role in the war against Saddam Hussein. That is the USS Constellation we're talking about. Her commanding officer will join us in just a few minutes.
By the way, that's very exciting. We're going to go right to that ship.
Absolutely right. It's crazy. That holds an amazing number of aircraft on it. It's an incredible ship. We'll talk about it. And former House Speaker Newt Gingrich will be here. Yes, and now we'll be joined in a moment by Evan Bayh.
Also, we'll check in with Ali tonight. By the way, this is really bothering you today.
What?
When I say...
Be my shrink. Go ahead.
No. Would you like me to? Look, I am not attacking you. I want to make this clear, because you have been very supportive of the troops.
Absolutely.
And I make a distinction for you. I really think when I heard Nancy Pelosi's comments tonight, are you not embarrassed?
No, I'm not. Look, Nancy
You're not embarrassed about that?
No, I'm not. She said she stands by her vote. Is there not another position we can have? Let me ask Senator Bayh this.
Well, ask Senator Bayh.
We're now joined in D.C. by Indiana Senator Evan Bayh. And we appreciate that we can get everything up and running here. Give Sean and I a chance to speak to each other for a change. Look, let me ask you about, Sean's going to mention Nancy Pelosi and some of the Democrats who have not been supportive of the war effort. Is there a legitimate other position than the position taken by the president? And those who have that position, what should they be saying now, Senator?
Well, Alan, that's a good question. I think you know my views on this issue. It's hard for me to say in the fullness of hindsight that we can say anything other than this was absolutely the right thing to do. You can say that perhaps the diplomacy could have been handled differently, but I honestly don't think we would have ever changed the French mind. The United Nations was never going to act, so you're asking me to explain a point of view that I don't hold, Alan, and it's difficult for me to do.
Not that you are, but there are people in the Democratic Party, and I mean, the point is we are a country of divergent views, and I think there's a sense now that another point of view is not very acceptable to a lot of people in the American public, as they saw the statue came down, they have a great sense of victory and the freedom of the Iraqi people, and that resonates with Americans of all political stripes. So what do you say to those in the Democratic Party who had a different opinion than you have in your own party prior to this?
Well, I always think it's best to admit the obvious, Alan, which, to my point of view, this was the right thing to do. I mean, looking at those scenes of the Iraqi people celebrating their freedom, knowing that a tyrant like Saddam will no longer be in a position to torture, to rape, to murder, that's a good thing. And sometimes the best approach is, if you've made a mistake, just to admit it, to learn from your lesson, and to move on. So I will say this, though, Alan, I do think it's not appropriate to question the patriotism of people who have a different point of view. They could be mistaken and still be good patriotic Americans.
What do you say, though, to a foreign policy? And, you know, there's been a foreign policy in this administration put forth by Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and President Bush and Dick Cheney, who for years have talked about, prior to their ascendancy to the executive branch, remaking the Middle East, and that there may be an agenda that goes beyond just Iraq. We're talking now about Syria. There's a rumor that war plans have been drawn up, if not enacted, for Iran and Syria. And what do you say then if this becomes a model for moving forward elsewhere in the Middle East?
Well, we asked Assistant Secretary Wolfowitz directly about Syria today, Alan, and he denies that there are any plans for any sort of action there. Clearly, Syria has behaved in some ways that are not helpful. They've sponsored terrorist organizations. Weapons flowed through Syria into Iraq.
Would you support going in?
Not on the basis of what we know today, but I do think it's appropriate to say to the Syrian government, you have a historic choice to make. You can get on the right side of history, abandon your support for terrorism, stop supporting other rogue regimes like Iraq and Saddam Hussein, or ultimately there will be consequences for that. I think we ought to give them every opportunity, Alan, to reform themselves voluntarily. If they persist in attacking Americans, well, then obviously we're going to have a major issue with them.
Hey, Senator, good to see you, by the way. And let me just quote you. Yesterday, you said it's an emotional day, a good day for human liberty around the world. Our country is strongest when other people are free to pursue their own aspirations. You're pleased that the people of Iraq have been liberated. Weapons of mass destruction will be removed. You almost sound like a member of my vast right-wing conspiracy, Senator.
On those things, Sean, we can all agree.
We can, which brings me to my political question that Alan alluded to earlier. You were right. You deserve a lot of credit. And to use the words that you were using earlier, and a point that I've been making the last 2 nights, and that is you're on the right side of history. The Democrats that fought Ronald Reagan were on the wrong side of history. Nancy Pelosi, by saying we could have brought that statue down for a lot less, she's proud of her vote. And I'm looking at the scenes of these people, you know, ripping up pictures of Saddam and pulling down that statue. She doesn't get it. She's a leader of the Democratic Party. Senator Kerry's comments, Tom Daschle's comments, Robert Byrd's comments, Charlie Rangel's comments. What is it about the leadership in your party? Does it disturb you?
Well, clearly there's a difference of opinion within the Democratic Party about whether this was the right thing to do, and apparently there are still some who believe that it could have been done differently. That's not a position, an opinion that I share, Sean, as you know, and I think there's always a human reluctance to have to take difficult steps. No one wants to go to war, but the hard fact is that there are some regimes, there are some evil despots, that the only way to deal with them is regrettably through the use of force.
You and I are singing from the same hymnal. I agree with you. I agree with your language. I believe it is about evil, and it's about standing up to it and defeating it before it defeats you.
Can I say one thing?
That is a very different worldview, though, than we're seeing in the leadership. Let me put it another way. If your vision for security in the world doesn't win the day in your party, I predict you will never find yourselves in position of leadership again, nor will you take back the White House.
The best politics, Sean, is always the right public policy. And at this point in time, it's imperative that we stand for a national security strategy that will protect Americans and to help promote freedom abroad. It's in the finest traditions of Franklin Roosevelt, John Kennedy, and other great Democrats.
FDR, Truman, JFK. But do you see that the new modern left leader in the Democratic Party is taking positions? They're taking positions that are the antithesis of those men? Because I do.
Well, clearly, many were wrong about the right thing to do in Iraq. That's a one-time mistake, Sean. Hopefully, it will not become a pattern, and we'll be able to articulate a strategy of defending America, both here at home from attacks like 9/11 and promoting our values abroad. And if we can do that, if we can articulate that kind of strategy, then I think the American people will be willing to place their trust in the Democratic Party.
Let's hope that never happens. No offense to you, of course. Hang on one second, Senator. We're gonna check in with Bret Baier. He's standing by at the Pentagon. He has a little breaking news for us tonight. Bret.
Hey, Sean. Senior defense officials tell us about 4 hours ago, 6 satellite-guided bombs were dropped on a safe house in Ar-Ramadi. This is west of Baghdad. The target, Saddam Hussein's half-brother. His name is Barzan al-Takriti. They believe he was taken out in this strike based on intelligence on the ground. Al-Takriti was the former chief of the Iraqi intelligence department, the ISS, and the secret police. A B-1 bomber was called in, dropped 6 satellite-guided bombs on this safe house. The battle damage assessment is ongoing at this hour, but there's intelligence to indicate that he was inside that building when it was taken out. Sean?
All right, Bret Baier at the Pentagon, thank you very much. Senator, if I can go back to you for just a second. I mean, one of the things you've got to love about the military operation in all of this, Senator, is the ability to move on the fly. The target of opportunity that we had the other night, literally, we were able to call those weapons down, those bunker busters, in 12 minutes.
Sean, the flexibility and the speed of the American military has been nothing short of breathtaking. It can only be surpassed by the courage and the heroism of the men and women who serve us in the armed forces. And we can be very proud of what we've accomplished in Iraq, freeing those people and demonstrating that we can put our might and our military capability to good use in terms of the values that we embrace.
Senator Bai, we thank you for being with us. I'm waiting for that announcement for when you're seeking the Democratic nomination for president. We know you're going to make it right here.
He's going to become a Republican.
And listening to Hannity, I think you got Hannity's vote. He's going to vote Democratic with you.
Well, Alan, I appreciate your comment. I would only say, are 10 not enough?
Thank you very much for
good to see you, Senator.
Coming up, the commanding officer of the USS Constellation will join us live, and then former House Speaker Newt Gingrich right here on Hannity and Colmes, all coming up in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Motorcraft brake service in 2 hours or less, like your participating Ford, Lincoln, or Mercury dealership. Or we'll give you a free oil change. Plus, enter to win trips to the Caribbean or to the world premiere of the hot new movie Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Nobody can do auto service like we do.
What stands the test of time? Our strongest bonds, our fundamental values. At New York Life, our humanity, integrity, and financial strength provide protection and security for millions of families through changing times. Values that make New York Life the company you keep.
Academy Award-winning director James Cameron is about to change the way you watch movies forever with a 3D real-life journey back to the Titanic. On April 11th, prepare for an unscripted, groundbreaking, historic motion picture event. Ghosts of the Abyss, an immersive 3D adventure. Rated G. Advance tickets now on sale. Call 1-888-DISNEY-6.
Fox News Channel Weekend. Stay with us for a complete look. Timely, in-depth coverage 24 hours a day. The latest on the war. Live, expert analysis, exclusive reports, breaking news. First, powerful war coverage the Fox way. Weekends on Fox News Channel. Real journalism, fair and balanced.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jane Skinner, and here is the latest on Operation Iraqi Freedom. American Marines with an alarming discovery on the outskirts of Baghdad. They believe that this truck could be a mobile biological weapons lab. Hidden inside the truck, Marines found open containers and a contraption that could be used to handle dangerous materials. Back in February, you may remember, Secretary of State Colin Powell warned that Iraq could have at least 18 mobile labs. And in central Iraq, a story that is still developing, Marines may have discovered an illegal nuclear weapons program in Tuwaitha. An embedded newspaper reporter says initial tests indicate weapons-grade plutonium was found in an underground complex. Defense officials are confirming to Fox News at least 4 Marines were seriously hurt in a suicide bombing. A man with explosives strapped to his chest blew himself up at a checkpoint you see here in Baghdad. The wounded were taken from the scene by helicopter. U.S. Special Forces are now inside the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk, and this comes after Kurdish fighters took over that city, even though the coalition asked them not to. Neighboring Turkey was worried about the possible creation of an independent Kurdish state. But earlier, Secretary of State Powell assured the Turks that the Kurds would pull back and U.S. forces would move in. And in the waters near Basra, Saddam Hussein's luxury yacht is drifting aimlessly. Locals say the yacht was hit by at least 16 different bombs, shells, and missiles over the past 2 weeks. We'll have more headlines in about an hour.
As we continue on Hannity and Combs, we'll check in with the USS Constellation and their commanding officer, Captain John Miller, in just a few minutes. First, we got former Speaker of the House, good friend of ours, Newt Gingrich, is with us. Sir, how are you?
Good to be with you.
All right, let me start with the political question first that we've been discussing all night. Did you hear Nancy Pelosi's comments?
No.
I have absolutely no regret about my vote against the war. The same questions remain: the cost in human lives, the cost to our budget, probably $100 billion. We could probably have brought down the statue for a lot less.
Well, all I can say is that Nancy Pelosi supported President Clinton for 8 years, and in that 8-year period, President Clinton didn't succeed in getting the statue down. I don't know what magic she has that she thinks she could have gotten it down for a lot less. This is the most rapid, most effective military campaign in history, and I can't imagine what she would have done differently, but I'm sure that Secretary Rumsfeld and General Franks would love to have her advice on whatever technique she thinks we should use in the future that would be even more effective than what she's been watching on television.
We have a Fox News alert. The House has opened votes to open Alaska Wildlife Refuge to oil drilling, ANWR. We have some estimates, Mr. Speaker, the second largest oil find in American history, the equivalent of 30 years of imported oil by some other estimates. The Democrats have been fiercely resistant to this. It will lessen our dependence on foreign oil. It is a vast wilderness. We could do it with only touching a small fraction of the landmass there. This is a good sign.
Yeah, and I think the vote of the liberals on this issue is proof of prejudice over fact. It is a fact that in the area where we currently have pipeline, there's actually been an increase in caribou herd population, for example, not a decrease as they had predicted. It is a fact that new technology now lets us get into the oil field with dramatically less impact, with a much smaller footprint. But frankly, if you have a strong enough prejudice, facts don't seem to matter.
If the news holds up today, we might have found a nuclear facility, weapons-grade plutonium, other things, to the extent of which nobody had any idea. What would that mean in terms of, how would that play out in terms of the United Nations, France, Germany, liberal Democrats in Washington?
Well, let me say, first of all, we do know that in 1991, we were shocked to discover how big a nuclear weapons program Saddam had. The CIA estimates have been totally wrong. American intelligence was simply much too cautious, and Saddam had a much bigger program than they thought. So it wouldn't be historically surprising if as we go through this process, we discover a lot more was going on than people thought, even those who were critical of the regime. But, you know, you ask a good question about what effect it will have, and I want to share with you an example I saw today that I've thought about all afternoon. One of the other channels showed interviews in Syria asking people what they thought. Now, here's an example of why it's hard for us to understand public opinion. Syria has a dictatorship. It's a Ba'athist Party dictatorship, exactly like Iraq. The Syrian dictator wiped out a city to punish them, much like Saddam, although the Syrian used artillery and not chemical weapons. The Syrian dictatorship has a secret police system, tortures and kills people. To go up to somebody and put them on videotape and say, "Hi, tell us how you feel about this, is to guarantee that they're going to tell you what they think the dictatorship wants to see, because these people are on videotape. They're going to be on television.
Congressman,
the secret police are going to watch it.
It's Alan. Welcome back to the show. The question then, the obvious question is, do we go to Syria next? Now, according to Newsday today, the conservative American Enterprise Institute this week published an article calling for U.S. attacks on Syria and Iran, and Donald Rumsfeld last week ordered the drawing up of contingency plans for possible invasion of Syria. I mean,
well, I don't know if that's true. I mean, we have contingency plans for lots and lots of things, and of course, if you don't have the contingency plans, you get attacked for not preparing, and if you do have the contingency plans, you get attacked for being too ready. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a contingency plan for a lot of things. I know of no effort by the administration to do anything militarily, but certainly we should be very clear with the Syrian dictatorship that we are not going to tolerate terrorist organizations, which are literally today in downtown Damascus. You can land at the airport, get a cab, give them the address of a terrorist organization, and they take you to the front door.
Well, you combine this with
hidden.
Paul Wolfowitz on one of the Sunday morning shows said there's got to be a change in Syria. You had Donald Rumsfeld warning Syria and Iran about hostile acts.
Well,
I mean, you've got a series of comments here by the administration with plans being drawn up. I just, you know, I mean, look, we would have said the same thing about Iraq 2 years ago. Should we seriously consider this as an option?
Alan, let me ask you this. If you know that there are at least 4 terrorist organizations sitting in downtown Damascus, wouldn't you agree with Secretary Wolfowitz, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, that there has to be a change in Syria? Wouldn't it seem reasonable to say to the Syrians,
but my question is, do we use Iraq as a role model, as a blueprint for what we might do elsewhere if these regimes don't fall?
I mean, I think that's a last resort, not a first resort. I think that in the case of Syria, I think we should be quite clear with them that we are unhappy. I think we should wait and see what we find in the records. If it turns out, as some people suggest, that Syria actually currently has a lot of the chemical weapons, for example, that were sent there, and I suspect there will be bureaucratic records in the Iraqi dictatorship that will indicate that if it's true. We might want to insist that they release those chemical weapons. I think we want to put pressure on Syria, but frankly, I think the most important step for us right now is to work very hard to create an independent, free Iraq with an independent leader, an Iraqi leader, so that the next time the Arab League meets, a genuinely free country.
Say anything today about the American POWs? We sure haven't heard much about them in the last few days.
Well, they're assuring us that they're doing everything possible to try to track them down, bring them home safely. The investigation continues. We're not hearing a lot publicly at this point because perhaps there's not firm information, or they certainly don't want to do anything to jeopardize those investigations, but they're assuring us that they're absolutely doing everything they can to bring them home, and of course they will not be forgotten.
All right, Mike Emanuel at the Pentagon, thank you very much, sir. Right now we want to check in with Greg Kelly, who of course has been with the 3rd Infantry Division for I guess 3 weeks now. He's in Baghdad. Greg, what's going on?
Hi, Bob and Lori. It's actually pretty quiet the past day, and the troops are happy about that. There has been no artillery called in, no close air support called in, and only one rather minor engagement with the enemy. That happened yesterday. Some guys came out with RPGs, unclear whether they were Republican Guard or paramilitary forces. They took a shot at a tank. The tank returned fire rather decisively. Apart from that, no enemy contact yesterday, no enemy contact so far today. Now, officially, they are still conducting combat operations. They are still looking for those pockets of resistance, but more and more, they're going to be moving toward stability operations, and sooner or later, an official word is going to come out that they are moving from combat operations to something they call SASO, those stability and security operations. And Baghdad could use some stability and security right now. There is a lot of looting going on in the streets. We saw it yesterday, really thousands of people helping themselves to appliances from government buildings and stores, furniture, air conditioners, TVs, beddings, anything you really can think of that would go in your home are coming out of these places. Now, they're not riotous scenes, the looting that we've seen. Fairly orderly, fairly controlled, and the people are quite happy. They're giving us a thumbs up. We haven't seen massive displays of jubilation, though, on this side of the river. Now, when it does go to a security operation, it's probably unlikely that this unit, the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, the one we've been with throughout, will have a huge role in that for a big reason. Number one, they've got tanks. They've got Bradleys. It's not those are not the types of tools that are ideally used for policing. Also, these guys have been on the trigger quite a lot lately for the past 3 weeks, and a lot of Iraqis have died at the hands of the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, a lot of paramilitary forces, Special Republican Guard. They're saying that these are probably not the guys who should be policing, where there's much more concern about collateral damage. It's kind of a different type of mission. They have some training in it, but they don't specialize in it, and most likely that will be handled by some other unit. So for now, things are quiet in Baghdad. They hope they stay that way, and they're waiting for an official word about what's going to happen next. Bob?
Greg, give me a feel for the looting. Is it, I wasn't sure whether you said it was worse than yesterday or not as prevalent, and I was curious what there was looting of, and if there's a feeling like, well, the government took what should have been ours, so we're taking it back, or whether these people looting are taking things from private businesses.
Yesterday was the worst looting we have seen. We haven't been out yet. Actually, right after this, we're going to be heading out into town for a little while. But they've been taking things from both private businesses and government office buildings. And what they have been taking is really just about anything you can think of. Is there the sense that they are just taking back what's been taken from them? That's hard to say. We don't have many Arabic translators with us. It's hard to get that kind of nuance from them. But you have to keep in mind that these guys have been in the dark. Lights have been turned out. Water isn't running in vast portions of the city for some time now. They probably need some resupply, but it's hard to say that the campaign, the war, prevented them from getting a new TV. So now they're getting a new TV. I mean, it looks like good old-fashioned looting to us. And but again, it has not been. There haven't been riots. There hasn't been a stampede into the stores with broken windows. Kind of file in, get their belongings, or what are now their belongings, and they leave. And it's fairly orderly. We haven't seen massive demonstrations or people stampeding over each other to get at this stuff. But again, it's government buildings and stores.
Hey, Greg, it's Lori here. Perhaps you've already heard this, but public support for what the troops are doing over there is on the rise. It actually has been on the rise every day since this campaign began. Do the guys you're with know that? Know that they have so much support from the American public?
They have a sense of it, and early on we told them the figures that they had gone up. A couple of weeks ago they had gone, the last I heard, from 72% to 80%. I don't know what those figures are at right now. They kind of have a sense that the American people are on their side, but almost more importantly to them, they have the sense that they're going home soon. At least that's the feeling here. They always said that once they got to Baghdad, Baghdad really was the last stop before Fort Stewart, their home base back in Georgia. And now that they're here, now that things seem to have gone very well, they feel like they are very close to home, and they're excited about that.
I guess they want to be on that midnight train to Georgia. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
Atlanta girl.
I am from Atlanta. I had to say that. All right, Greg Kelly with the Third ID. Thanks a lot, buddy. Take care of yourself. And now, lucky for us, we're going to get an update from Colonel Oliver North, who is standing by somewhere in Baghdad, I believe on the east side of the Tigris River. Ollie, I know that yesterday was the toughest day so far for you Marines out there. What's going on now?
Lori, one of the things that's remarkable is that Rick Leventhal, Greg Kelly, and I have spent the last 3 days probably within 1.5 miles or 2 miles of each other, and seeing the battle from those three different perspectives. Thankfully, Fox is able to give our viewers, I think, a real good idea of what's happening around the city. On the east side, or north, depending on where you're looking at the Tigris River, last night looked to me like a scene from Dante's Inferno. There were literally whole blocks of the city burning. And you had aircraft being engaged by AAA anti-aircraft artillery. One of those pilots who flew through it 5 times into the same hot zone, First Lieutenant Chris Graham, who's standing right next to me with HMM 268, had some remarkable encounters yesterday. We'll come back to what was happening on the civilian side, but I want you to hear from Chris. First of all, last night, as we're flying those casualties out from a suicide bomber, hot zone, you've been in it 5 times yesterday. Describe what you saw as you came over the city.
When we came over the city, it looked like about a mile or 2 mile long section to the south that was on fire. Primarily, some of the palaces were burning, and some of the other structures, some of the larger buildings out here, were in shambles.
One of the things that happened, Laura, yesterday is that as Chris was going into the zone to evacuate 9 wounded Marines, an RPG flew right across the front of his canopy. Didn't miss it by a foot. I think I captured it on tape, and we'll send that back to you as soon as we get to a satellite dish. But tell me, what was it like sitting there watching an RPG with your name on it?
It was nice to see it miss.
Anybody at home you want to say hi to, Chris?
Thank you. Got to say hi to my mom and dad and all my friends. And Karen, good luck on the bar exam, and I'll see you soon.
You know, one of the remarkable things, Lori, about all of this experience, now 23 days with these Marines, and unfortunately most of us look and smell like Chris. We all need a shower, we all need a shave, but none of that spirit has been lost on the Navy corpsmen, the U.S. Marines, the folks who make up this air-ground team that have carried this fight so far. All of us are disappointed to see the kinds of sectarian retribution that's now occurring, and the suicide bomber that wounded 5 Marines last night is unfortunately much of what we think we're going to have to face, at least until some kind of civil authority is established here. The good news, Laurie, is that apparently most of these irregulars, all of those we've seen thus far, have been from some other country. And as I reported last night, the imam of the mosque right behind us came up to me yesterday and with an interpreter said, "I'm asking my people," meaning the Iraqis who attend his mosque, "to turn over the foreigners to the Americans." And I said, "Well, we're foreigners." He said, "Oh no, you're the Americans. The foreigners are those we want out of our country." Lori?
Colonel Bob here. Wanted to find out whether the Marines that you're with feel that this is it as far as their responsibility. In other words, this is it being Baghdad, or whether they anticipate there could be responsibilities farther north, up where so much Kurdish action is taking place right now.
Bob, I'm not going to. I'll ask Lieutenant Graham to answer some of that question, but of course none of us are going to speculate about future operations because we know the ground rules here. But let me just tell you this: there are a lot of people very concerned about what might